In Season 27, Episode 1, Donald Trump appears on South Park with the face of Saddam Hussein. Not as a metaphor, not as a joke about his policies. Literally. The animation style, the photograph head flapping open and closed, the high-pitched whiny voice, the catchphrase about telling everyone to relax, the song from the 1999 movie playing in the background, the relationship with Satan in bed. Every single piece of the cartoon Saddam from 26 years ago transferred onto the sitting president of the United States. Most people watching it laughed. Almost nobody asked why. The answer is the entire history of South Park itself. 6 presidents, 28 seasons, 3 decades of a small cartoon in Colorado quietly building a theory of American power that nobody else on television was willing to put on screen. Tonight, that whole story gets told from the beginning. Every president, every episode, every choice. Welcome to East Park. Let's get started. The setup. South Park arrives in 1997 and inherits Bill Clinton. On August 13th, 1995, 1992 by intensive developers special temp to the real culture of. On August 13th, 1997, and doint the temp to the real culture of constantly that a bring and buy few minute stuff. South Park, a small cable channel called Comedy Central, aired a new cartoon at 10 at night. The show was called South Park. It had 4 foul-mouthed third graders, a town full of strange adults, and a budget so small the animators were literally cutting paper shapes and moving them around by hand. Most people who watched the first episode probably did not think they were seeing the start of one of the most important political shows in American television history. They were watching a cartoon where an alien probe gets stuck inside a fat kid and his cow gets abducted into space. But the timing of that premiere matters a lot. Bill Clinton was sitting in the White House. He had just won his second election the year before, beating Bob Dole by a comfortable margin. His approval ratings were strong, the economy was booming, and he was about to become the most scandal-soaked president of the modern era. Because a young White House intern named Monica Lewinsky was about to become a name every adult in America would know. South Park did not arrive ready to satirize a president. The show in 1997 was rough. It was crude. It was about poop jokes and aliens and a talking piece of feces named Mr. Hanky. The political voice that the show would later become famous for did not exist yet. What South Park did have, even in those early episodes, was a willingness to look at whatever was happening in the country that week and put it on screen with a straight face. That instinct became the engine that pulled the show into politics, and Bill Clinton was the first president who had to sit there and take it. The first real Clinton episode came on April 22nd, 1998. It was called Cartman's Mom is Still a Dirty Slut, and it was the second half of a 2-part story that had been a huge cliffhanger the year before. The whole town wanted to know who Cartman's father was. Cartman's mother had slept with so many people that the answer could have been anyone, and one of the people in the lineup of possible fathers was Bill Clinton, the President of the United States. That alone was a wild thing to put in a cartoon in 1998. Network shows did not do this. Saturday Night Live had been doing political impressions for decades, but those were sketches with actors in costume. South Park was animating the actual sitting president as a cartoon character, and showing him in a hot tub with a cartoon woman from a small mountain town in Colorado. The episode goes further. Cartman's mother sleeps with Clinton in order to convince him to change abortion laws. He agrees. He says, in his Clinton voice, that he will legalize 40th trimester abortions for her. The joke is that Clinton, in this version, is so easily controlled by sex that any woman could basically run the country if she just slept with him. The Lewinsky scandal had broken in January of 1998, only 3 months before this episode aired. South Park took that scandal, turned it into a small-town story, and sold it back to America as a cartoon. The country was still arguing every night on cable news about what had happened. South Park already had its take. The president was a horn dog who would do anything for sex, and the show was not going to apologize for saying it. This is the first thing to understand about how South Park treated Clinton. The show did not really care about his policies. It did not have strong feelings about welfare reform or NAFTA or the budget. What South Park cared about was the man, the personality, the thing about Clinton that everyone in America was already talking about anyway, and what people were talking about was sex, so that became the joke, over and over and over. The next big Clinton appearance came in season 3, in an episode called Chin Pokomon. This one aired on November 3rd, 1999. The plot was about a Japanese toy fad sweeping South Park, and the toys turning out to be a Japanese plot to get American children to attack Pearl Harbor. The Japanese executives flatter every American they meet by telling them how impressive their large penises are. Clinton, watching the news, gets flattered the same way, so he goes on national television and addresses the country. The address is not about policy. It is not about the economy. It is one sentence long. He simply tells the American people that he has a large penis. Then he walks off. This is doing more analytical work than it looks like. Parker and Stone are not just making a dirty joke. They are making the argument that the President of the United States is so vain, so easily flattered, and so personally consumed with his own ego that any foreign country can manipulate him by complimenting him. Clinton is not the bad guy in Shin Pokemon. The Japanese are the ones doing the plot. Clinton is just the person they use to push it forward because he is too caught up in himself to notice he is being played. That same idea will show up again in South Park decades later when the show starts looking at other presidents. The seed is planted right here in season 3. Clinton's biggest moment on the show in this era came in the South Park feature film, which is the next section. Before getting there though, there is one more episode that matters. It is called The Red Badge of Gayness. It aired on November 24th, 1999 in season 3. In this episode, Cartman gets the entire South Park Civil War reenactment club drunk and convinces them that the Confederacy actually won the Civil War. They start marching across the country, picking up other drunken reenactors until they reach Washington, D.C., where they confront Clinton himself. Clinton is shown in the Oval Office trying to figure out what to do. At the end of the episode, after Cartman's plan collapses, Clinton sits down with the boys and gives them a small history lesson. He explains why the Civil War actually ended the way it did, and then Stan and Kyle, who normally end every episode with a big speech about what they learned, just call Clinton a name and walk off. This is one of the first times South Park did something that would later become its signature move. The president, the most powerful man in the country, gives a thoughtful explanation. The kids do not care. The show treats Clinton as a person who actually knows things, who is actually trying to do his job, but who cannot get the children of America to listen to him because they would rather make jokes. Clinton in this scene is not a villain. He is just a tired man explaining things that nobody wants to hear. The animation gives him sad eyes. His voice is a slow drawl. He looks like he has had a very long day. That is the version of Clinton that South Park settled on by the end of his presidency. He was not evil. He was not stupid. He was a man who probably wanted to do the right thing for the country, but who kept getting tripped up by his own personal weaknesses, and by other people who knew exactly which buttons to push to get him to do whatever they wanted. It is worth pausing here to look at what South Park was not doing during the Clinton years. The show was not making big speeches about whether Clinton should be impeached. The actual impeachment trial happened in early 1999, right in the middle of South Park's run. Other comedy shows were obsessed with it. Late night hosts spent every monologue on it. South Park barely touched the legal side. The show stuck with the personal stuff, the hot tub stuff, the penis stuff, the Lewinsky stuff. Why? Because the personal stuff was funnier, but also because Parker and Stone had not yet developed the political voice they would later use on Bush and Trump. They were still figuring out what kind of show this was. And during Clinton's years, what the show mostly was a celebrity roast aimed at a president instead of an actor. The character design for Clinton in these early episodes was simple. He had white hair, a black suit, half-closed eyes, and a small chin. He looked tired all the time. The animators were not putting in a lot of work to make Clinton look funny on his own. The humor came from putting him in situations he should not be in. Sleeping with a small-town single mother, bragging about his penis on television, trying to give a kid a history lesson while being completely ignored. The animation was simple because the joke did not need fancy animation. The joke was that this was the president. That simplicity tells us something else. South Park in 1997, 1998, and 1999 was not yet confident enough to make Clinton the centerpiece of an episode. He was always a guest. The boys were the focus. The town was the focus. Cartman was the focus. Clinton showed up for a few minutes, did his Clinton thing, and left. He was a special guest star, the way you might have a celebrity show up for one scene on a sitcom. The show had not yet figured out that you could build entire episodes around a political idea. That would come later, with Bush, with the 2000 election, with everything that followed. There is one more thing about the Clinton era that sets up everything else. Clinton was the first president that South Park ever had to handle. Every other president the show would deal with, Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, would be filtered through the lessons the writers learned during the Clinton years. The Clinton episodes are the lab. They are where Parker and Stone figured out what works and what does not when you put a sitting president in a cartoon. They figured out that the audience will accept it. They figured out that you can be cruel and the country will laugh anyway. They figured out that Comedy Central will not stop you, even if the president is being shown in a hot tub. And they figured out that timing matters. If you make the joke while the news is still hot, the country pays attention. If you wait, the joke goes stale. These were the lessons that Parker and Stone carried forward. They would use them on every president who came after, and they would sharpen them year year after year, until the show became something nobody in 1997 could have predicted. A cartoon about 4 boys in Colorado that the White House would one day issue official statements about. The Clinton South Park is gentle by the show's later standards. The jokes are dirty, but the politics are soft. There is no real anger at Clinton. There is no big argument the show is trying to win about him. There is just a tired-looking cartoon man in a black suit who keeps getting caught with his pants down. That version of the show is barely recognizable when you compare it to what South Park became 15 or 20 years later. But every show has to start somewhere, and South Park started here. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The strange thing, looking back, is that Clinton might have been the easiest president the show ever had to deal with. He was already a punchline before South Park ever touched him. The country had already decided what kind of man he was. South Park just confirmed it in cartoon form. The hard work of building a political voice, the kind of voice that could go after a war, or an election, or a movement, or a moral panic. That work was still ahead. Clinton was practice. He was the warm-up. The real test would come in 1999, when the show stopped being a television series for one summer and became something much bigger. They made a movie, and in that movie, Bill Clinton would have to do something no cartoon president had ever been asked to do before. He would have to declare war. Section 2. The movie era. Clinton in bigger, longer, and uncut, and the first real statement. In the summer of 1999, South Park did something that almost no cable cartoon had ever done. It got a movie. A real, full-length, theatrical movie that would play in actual movie theaters across the country, with a soundtrack of original songs, an R rating, and a title that was a dirty joke before you even bought your ticket. South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut came out on June 30th, 1999. It was Parker and Stone's biggest test as filmmakers, and it was also the first time the show had to do something more than make jokes about a president. It had to put him at the center of a national crisis, and it had to do it in a way that audiences would accept for an hour and a half. The plot of the movie is one of the most strange and ambitious stories in any animated film of that era. 2 Canadian comedians named Terrence and Phillip release a movie so dirty that American children copy every bad word in it. The parents of America panic. The country becomes obsessed with cleaning up its kids. A group of moms led by Sheila Broflovsky forms an organization called Mothers Against Canada. They pressure the United States government to take action. Eventually, 2 Canadian celebrities are executed on stage in front of a huge crowd. The execution turns out to be a trigger that opens the gates of hell. Satan and Saddam Hussein, who are dating in this movie, prepare to take over the planet. And in the middle of all of this, Bill Clinton is the man sitting in the Oval Office trying to figure out what to do. This is a much bigger job for Clinton than anything the show had asked of him before. In the early episodes, Clinton was a guest. He showed up, told a joke, and left. In the movie, Clinton has to be the president during a war. He has to address the nation. He has to make decisions that will affect millions of people. The movie does not let him be a side character. It puts him on the center stage and makes him do the work of a leader. The way the movie handles him is the first real political statement the show ever made. Early in the film, Clinton appears in a televised address to the country. He explains, in his slow southern drawl, that the United States has officially declared war on Canada in response to the killing of 2 beloved Baldwin brothers. The Baldwins are a real American acting family. The movie is making a joke about the kind of celebrity-obsessed thinking that gets countries into stupid wars. Clinton is the face of that thinking. He says the words. He signs the papers. He puts the war machine in motion. And the entire reason for the war is something that did not actually happen the way the news is reporting it. The Canadians did not kill the Baldwins. But Clinton, like the rest of America, has been pulled into the panic. He believes what he is being told, so he acts on it. Then comes the line that defines the Clinton of this movie. He says, "My fellow Americans, at 5 in the morning today, a day which will live in infamy, the Canadians have bombed the Baldwins." In response, the United States has declared war on Canada. Anyone watching with even a little knowledge of American history would catch the joke right away. Clinton is reading, almost word for word, from Franklin Roosevelt's speech after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the 1941 speech, the most famous war speech in American history. South Park is putting that speech in Clinton's mouth, but the reason for the war is not Pearl Harbor. It is the death of 2 actors. The movie is saying that But this is what American war speeches sound like now. They sound serious. They sound historic. They sound like the words a president has to say when something terrible has happened. But the actual reason the country is going to war is silly. It is small. It is something a few angry parents and a confused president cooked up in a panic. That is a very strong argument for a cartoon to make. In 1999, about a sitting president, the country was not at war. There was no big national crisis happening. Parker and Stone were not responding to a real moment. They were predicting one. They were saying, look at how easily this country gets pulled into hysteria. Look at how quickly the president will sign off on something stupid if enough loud parents demand it. Look at how the words of war get used for things that are not actually wars. The movie is a warning, and Clinton is the man delivering the warning, even though he does not know it. The movie also does something that the early Clinton episodes never did. It puts Clinton on screen with a regular South Park character in a real argument. Sheila Broflovsky, Kyle's mother, becomes the new Secretary of Offense in the war effort. She walks right into the Oval Office and pushes Clinton aside. She is the one really running the war. She is the one giving the orders. Clinton tries to step in. He tries to take charge, but Sheila is bigger than him in this scene, both in the cartoon and in the actual story. She has more energy. She has more anger. She has more drive. Clinton, the president, gets shoved out of the way like he is just another man in a suit. This is the moment where South Park stopped being a show that just made jokes about Clinton and became a show with a real opinion about him. The opinion was simple. Clinton, the man with the most powerful office in the world, can be pushed aside by a single angry suburban mother if she yells loud enough. The president is not really the most powerful person in America. The angry, panicking, moral crusading parents are. They drive the bus. The president just sits in the front seat and waves at the crowd. The movie keeps going. The war happens. American troops fight Canadian troops in actual combat. People die. Kenny dies. The boys end up at the front lines. And through it all, Clinton stays in the background, occasionally showing up to deliver another speech, while the real action happens between Sheila Broflovsky, Saddam Hussein, Satan, and the boys. By the end of the movie, the war stops. Things get put back together, more or less. Clinton survives. He stays in the Oval Office. The country goes back to normal, even though normal in South Park is never very normal. But the lesson of the movie is sitting there for anyone who wants to find it. The president is not the threat. The threat is a country that gets pulled into stupid wars by stupid panics and lets one angry mother run the whole thing. The movie matters for one more reason. It is the first time Parker and Stone showed they could write a story that was about something bigger than the joke. The Clinton episodes before this had been about specific scandals. The Lewinsky thing, the penis thing, the hot tub thing. Each episode was tied to a single news story. The movie is not about a single news story. It is about a way of thinking. It is about how Americans react to fear. It is about how easily a country can talk itself into doing something terrible. Clinton in the movie is just the face on the television screen. The real subject is the country itself. That shift in focus is the seed of everything South Park would later become as a political show. Once you can build a story around an idea instead of a single news event, you can keep going forever. You can come back to the same idea every few years. You can apply it to a new president. You can apply it to a new war. You can apply it to a new panic. The framework lasts. The framework is the show. There is also a small detail in the movie that becomes huge later. In the soundtrack, there is a song where Saddam Hussein, who is in hell and dating Satan, sings about how he is going to change. The song is called I Can Change. It plays during a moment where Saddam is trying to convince Satan that he is not a bad boyfriend. It is meant to be funny because Saddam is obviously not going to change. He is who he is. But the melody of that song will return on this show in 2025, decades later, to introduce a different president. That is a connection nobody in 1999 could have predicted. But it shows that South Park, even back then, was building a memory. Every joke, every song, every character design was being filed away. The show was creating a history that it could refer back to forever. The animation of Clinton in the movie is also slightly different from the early episodes. He has more wrinkles, his chin is more pronounced, his eyes look more tired. The animators were starting to put more work into him as a character because he was no longer just a guest star. He had screen time, he had decisions to make. He had to be a real cartoon person, not a quick punchline. When the movie came out, it became a hit. It made over $80 million at the box office on a small budget. It got an Oscar nomination for one of its songs. The song that got the nomination was Blame Canada, which is a song the movie uses to make fun of how Americans always look for someone else to blame for their own problems. That song is sung by Sheila Broflovsky, not by Clinton. The most famous song in the movie is a song about how the moral panic parents drive the country, while the president just stands there. Even the Oscar nomination is making the show's argument for it. The Clinton in this movie is the most complete version of him that South Park ever made. After the movie, his appearances on the show became smaller. He shows up in the Red Badge of Gayness later that same year, which is the episode covered in the last section. He shows up here and there in later seasons. But the big statement, the real argument, the full version of how the show saw him is in the movie. Everything else is just footnotes. Looking back, the Clinton of South Park is a strange figure. He is not the villain. He is not the hero. He is the president during a moment when the show was figuring out what kind of show it wanted to be. He had the bad luck to be in office while two young men with a cardboard cutout cartoon were learning how to do political comedy. He took the hits. He took the jokes. He gave the show its first practice run. And by the time he left office in January of 2001, South Park had grown up. The show that had started as a poop joke factory in 1997 had become something more serious, even when it was being silly. It had a worldview. It had a method. It had a voice. Clinton handed off the country to a new president on January 20th, 2001. The new president was very different from him. The new president was a Republican from Texas with a famous last name. The new president would face a moment, less than a year into his term, that would change everything about American life and American politics. South Park would be there to cover that moment too. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But before the show could deal with the new president seriously, it had to deal with how the new president got his job in the first place. And the way he got his job was the messiest, most confusing, most disputed presidential election in modern American history. South Park aired its episode about that election only days after it happened, while the country was still arguing about who had actually won. That is where everything changes. Section 3, the 2000 election and the Florida recount. Trapper Keeper and the birth of election episodes. The 2000 presidential election was the strangest election that America had seen in over 100 years. On the night of November 7th, 2000, the country went to bed without knowing who had won. Television networks had called the state of Florida for Al Gore, then taken it back, then called it for George W. Bush, then taken that back too. The state was too close to call, and without Florida, neither man could win the presidency. The whole election came down to a few hundred votes in a few counties of one southern state. The country sat there for over a month, watching news coverage of people in glasses staring at small paper ballots through magnifying glasses, trying to figure out whether tiny pieces of paper called chads were hanging or punched through or just dimpled. The word recount became the most common word in American news. Lawyers flooded into Florida from both parties. Celebrities flew down to protest. The Supreme Court eventually had to step in and stop the recount, which handed the election to Bush by a margin of 537 votes. This was the moment South Park needed. The show had been waiting for an event like this. A real, messy, confusing, embarrassing political moment that the entire country was glued to. A moment where everyone was asking the same questions and nobody had good answers. Parker and Stone had been doing topical jokes about Clinton for 3 years. Now they had something bigger. They had an actual election crisis. And they had a chance to do something nobody else on television could do. They had a chance to put it on screen while it was still happening. The episode they made was called Trapper Keeper. It aired on November 15th, 2000. That date is important. The election had happened only 8 days before. The recount was still going on. Nobody in America knew who the next president was going to be. The Florida courts were still hearing arguments. The Supreme Court had not yet ruled. The country was in the middle of the storm. And on a Wednesday night on Comedy Central, South Park aired an episode that was already making fun of the whole thing. The animators had worked through the previous weekend. The episode was finished at 9 in the morning on the day it aired. Parker and Stone reportedly worked with about 70 people to push it out the door in time. They got it done. And nothing else on television, scripted or otherwise, could match how fast they were. The plot of the episode is split into 2 parts. The main story is about Cartman getting a new high-tech school binder called a Trapper Keeper, which turns out to be a futuristic supercomputer that wants to take over the world. A robot from the future, who looks like Bill Cosby, comes back in time to destroy it. This is the loud, weird, science fiction half of the episode. It is a parody of the Terminator movies and of an old Japanese cartoon called Akira. It is funny on its own, but the real point of the episode is happening in the other story. The second story is about Mr. Garrison's kindergarten class. He has been demoted from teaching the older kids and is now stuck with the very young ones. The class needs to elect a class president. There are 2 candidates. One is a boy named Fillmore, who is the nephew of a famous talk show host named Rosie O'Donnell. The other is a boy named Ike, who is Kyle's adopted little brother from Canada. Ike is supposedly very smart, even though he can barely speak. The election in the kindergarten class ends in a tie. Every kid in the class votes, except for one. There is one little girl named Flora who has not voted yet. The whole election comes down to her single single vote. That name is the joke. Florida, the state that the entire 2000 election came down to. South Park is making the connection out loud. The little girl is Florida. She cannot decide. She stands there, going back and forth, unable to pick a side. Garrison and the other kids stare at her, waiting. Eventually, she picks Ike. Then everything falls apart. The other side refuses to accept the result. They demand a recount, then another recount, then another. Mr. Garrison counts the votes again and again and again, getting more and more frustrated. The numbers never quite match up. Adults get involved, lawyers show up, Rosie O'Donnell, the real person, is voiced as a cartoon character and flies into the kindergarten classroom to protest the result. She brings a team of lawyers with her. She demands action. She refuses to leave. In real life, Rosie O'Donnell had signed a petition along with other celebrities including Harvey Weinstein and Gloria Steinem asking for a revote in Palm Beach County, the part of Florida where many people had voted for the wrong candidate by accident because of confusing ballot designs. South Park took that real-world celebrity action and dropped it directly into the kindergarten. The cartoon Rosie O'Donnell does on the show exactly what the real Rosie O'Donnell did in Florida. There is another guest. The real Reverend Jesse Jackson also showed up in Florida after the election to protest, claiming that black voters had been kept from voting because their names had been wrongly removed from the voter rolls. South Park puts Jesse Jackson into the kindergarten too. He walks in and complains that there are no African American children in the class. He demands that the class be more inclusive. The cartoon Jesse Jackson is doing on the show exactly what the real Jesse Jackson was doing in Florida that same week. The amount of detail South Park crammed into this little kindergarten subplot is genuinely amazing. Every piece of the real-world recount has a cartoon version in the classroom. The indecisive Florida voters become Flora. The recounts that never end become Mr. Garrison counting votes over and over. The celebrity lawsuits become Rosie O'Donnell flying in with her lawyers. The accusations of voter suppression become Jesse Jackson barging into the room. There is even a kid who was absent on voting day, which becomes the cartoon stand-in for the absentee ballots that the real-life campaigns were arguing about. In the end, the kindergarten election goes nowhere. After all the lawyers, all the recounts, all the protests, all the celebrity guests, the boy who lost finally gives up. He says the whole game is stupid and walks away. The kids decide to finger paint instead. Garrison is happy. The election is over. Nothing has been resolved in any meaningful way. They just stopped fighting because they got bored. This is South Park's argument about the 2000 election in one scene. The whole national crisis, the whole month of recounts, the whole legal war, the whole country sitting on edge, the whole thing was kindergarten. It was children fighting over something that did not really matter, with adults yelling on the sidelines while the actual issues that affect people's lives went untouched. The election was not serious. It just looked serious because everyone agreed to take it seriously. If everyone had just walked away, the country could have gone back to finger painting too. This is also the moment South Park invented something new, a method, a trick, a way of doing election episodes that the show would use for the next 16 years. The trick is simple. Take the real election, shrink it down to something tiny that kids can understand, and then let the cartoon adults overreact to the tiny thing the same way the real adults are overreacting to the big thing. The size of the event in the cartoon does not matter. What matters is the comparison. By making the real election look as silly as a kindergarten vote, South Park is saying the real election is just as silly. The trick works because the audience does the math themselves. Nobody has to spell it out. The audience sees Flora and goes, oh, that is Florida. The audience sees Rosie O'Donnell and goes, oh, she really did do that. The audience sees Jesse Jackson and goes, oh, he did that too. Every joke confirms what the audience already knows. This was the same trick they would use 4 years later for the 2004 election, where the candidates would become a giant douche and a turd sandwich. It was the same trick they would use 8 years later for the 2008 election, where the candidates would become jewel thieves running a heist. It was the same trick they would use 12 years later for the 2012 election, where Cartman would steal ballots in swing states for a deal involving Star Wars. The Trapper Keeper kindergarten election is the original. Every later election episode is built on the bones of this one. The show also did something that nobody really noticed at the time. They made fun of the country's hunger for these political fights. The kindergarten kids do not actually care about who wins their election. They care about being on the winning side. They care about seeing their candidate beat the other one. They will demand recounts and call lawyers and bring in celebrities, but at the end of the day, they would rather just paint. The fight is the only point. Once the fight stops being fun, they move on. South Park is suggesting that the country is the same way. Americans love an election fight. Americans love yelling at each other on the news. Americans will keep yelling until they get bored, and then then they will move on. The result almost does not matter. The fight is the entertainment. That argument lands very differently depending on who is making it. Coming from a serious political show, it would feel insulting. Coming from a cartoon with a kid named Cartman fighting a robot Bill Cosby, it lands as a joke, but the joke is doing serious work. The show is suggesting that maybe the entire system is broken, and maybe nobody really wants it fixed because the broken system is more fun to watch. There is something else worth noticing about this episode. The kindergarten election is not the main story. Cartman and the killer binder is the main story. South Park did not put the political content in the spotlight. They put it in the background. They made the audience work a little to find it. They trusted the audience to notice. That choice tells you something about how Parker and Stone thought about their own political voice in 2000. They were not yet ready to make a whole episode about the election. They were not yet sure they had the muscle for it. So they tucked the election into a side plot where they could play with it without having to commit a whole 22 minutes to it. 4 years later, that would change. By 2004, the show would build an entire episode around an election. The political stuff would no longer be the side plot. It would be the main event. South Park grew into its political voice in stages, and Trapper Keeper is one of those stages. It is the show learning that it can do this. It is the show stretching its legs. The episode also matters for another reason that is hard to talk about without sounding too serious. It was one of the first times an animated American show had reacted to a national event in real time. Other cartoons took weeks or months to make episodes. South Park did it in days. That speed became the show's signature. Decades later, that same ability to write, animate, voice, and air an episode in less than a week would let the show respond to almost anything that happened in the news. A scandal could break on Monday and be a South Park episode on Wednesday. That kind of turnaround is normal now for the show, but in 2000, it was new. Trapper Keeper proved it could be done. After that, every president, every election, every scandal had to deal with the possibility that South Park would have a cartoon version of the whole mess on television within days. When the dust settled, George W. Bush was declared the winner of the 2000 election. He took office in January of 2001. The country moved on, more or less. Some people stayed angry. Most people went back to their lives. South Park went back to making episodes about Cartman and Stan and Kyle and Kenny. The kindergarten election was a one-time thing. It came, it landed, it was over. The show had passed its first big test. It could handle a national political moment in real time and come out with something funny and sharp. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But the Bush years would not be a normal 4 years. They would be defined by something nobody saw coming. Less than 9 months after Bush took office, 2 airplanes hit 2 buildings in New York City, and the entire country changed. South Park would have to figure out how to make jokes about a war, how to make jokes about fear, how to make jokes about a president who is leading the country through the biggest national wound since Pearl Harbor. The Clinton era had been a warm-up. The Trapper Keeper episode had been a stretching exercise. What came next was the real fight, and the show would have to grow up faster than it ever had before. Section 4, 9/11, Iraq, and the Bush years. From super best friends to mystery of the urinal deuce. The Bush years made South Park grow up. The show had to. America had changed in ways that nobody had a script for, and the rules of comedy that had worked under Clinton no longer fit. You could not write a hot tub joke about a man whose biggest decisions involved invading countries. You could not write a celebrity roast joke about a president who was now the face of a war. The show had to find a new way to talk about a president, because the country was now talking about presidents in a new way. The first real Bush appearance on the show came in season 5, in an episode called Super Best Friends. It aired on July 4th, 2001. That date is worth holding on to, because it was about 2 months before everything in America was going to change. In this episode, the magician David Blaine has started a religion called Blaintology, which is a thinly veiled poke at Scientology. Bush appears in a small role, sitting in the Oval Office trying to decide whether to give the Blaintologist tax-free status. He is shown as a man who is not quite sure what he is doing. He looks confused. He acts unsure. The decision seems to be made by the people around him as much as by him. This is the early Bush, the Bush before everything happened. He is just another character in the show, a politician shown without much weight or attention. Then September 11th, 2001 happened. South Park had to figure out how to deal with the most painful day in modern American memory. The show was off the air for the rest of that month, like everything else on television. When new episodes came back in November of 2001, the very first one was called Osama bin Laden Has Farty Pants. It put Cartman face to face with the cartoon version of the man who had ordered the attacks on the World Trade Center. outlier. The episode tried to use old Looney Tunes cartoon logic to handle a moment that had no good way to be handled. The boys end up in Afghanistan. They meet Afghan children who hate America for understandable reasons. They eventually beat bin Laden in the same way Bugs Bunny used to beat Elmer Fudd. It was a strange episode. It was trying to do too much, but the show had reacted. The show had said something, and from that point forward, the Bush presidency was no longer a side note in South Park. It was the center of gravity. What followed over the next several years is the most political stretch in the show's history up to that point. The Iraq War started in March of 2003. The country split hard into people who supported the war and people who hated it. The cable news argument was constant. Anti-war protests filled streets. Pro-war voices filled airwaves. South Park, which had been mostly about pop culture under Clinton, started showing up week after week with episodes that touched on the war, on patriotism, on what was happening in the country. The show found a position that almost nobody else in entertainment was taking. The position was, both sides are kind of crazy, and most of what people are saying is dumb, and the country would be better off if everyone just calmed down. That position would later become known as the South Park political voice. It started forming during the Bush years. The show kept showing Bush in small ways. He had no lines in the season 7 episode South Park is Gay, where the entire town starts dressing in metrosexual fashion. Bush gets a makeover from the cast of Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. He shows up in the background. He is just there for a quick visual gag. In season 6's A Ladder to Heaven, Bush warns the United Nations that Saddam Hussein is in heaven, building weapons of mass destruction. An interviewer asks Bush whether he is high or just stupid. Bush insists he is not high. The episode plays the moment for laughs, but then at the very end of the episode, the show does something interesting. It actually shows Saddam in heaven, building bombs exactly the way Bush had said. The joke is on the audience. The president who looked stupid was actually right. South Park is testing the audience here. The show is asking, what if the man you are laughing at actually knows something you do not? That kind of trick became part of the show's Bush-era voice. The show would set up a joke that seemed to put Bush on one side, then flip the joke at the last minute and put the audience on the other side. The audience would arrive thinking they knew what the show was saying. They would leave not quite sure. There is a season 9 episode that hits this idea even harder. It is called 2 Days Before the Day After Tomorrow. It aired on October 19th, 2005. The whole town floods after a giant beaver dam breaks. The flood is treated like a global warming disaster. The town panics. They start blaming each other. They start blaming Bush. There's a long sequence where the news anchors and the townspeople loudly insist that the flooding is Bush's fault. Kyle, who normally is the show's voice of reason, is pulled into the blaming. The episode is mocking the rush to blame the president for everything that happens, no matter how unrelated it is. This was a real reaction to the response to Hurricane Katrina, which had hit New Orleans about 6 weeks before the episode aired. The country had spent weeks blaming Bush for the slow response to the storm. South Park watched all of that and produced an episode that argued the rush to blame him was its own kind of dumb behavior, regardless of whether the actual blame was deserved. Once again, the show was refusing to pick a side. Or maybe, more accurately, the show was picking its own third side. But the centerpiece of the Bush years on South Park, the episode that does the heaviest lifting and makes the biggest argument, is Mystery of the Urinal Deuce. It aired on October 11th, 2006 in season 10. It is one of the strangest political episodes the show has ever made, and it might also be one of the most important. The setup is almost too dumb to explain. Somebody has taken a bowel movement in a urinal at South Park Elementary. Mr. Mackey, the school counselor, becomes obsessed with finding out who did it. He keeps using funny words to describe what happened. The school staff cannot figure out who is responsible. Cartman, working in the background, decides that the urinal incident is just like 9/11. He builds a slide presentation arguing that 9/11 was an inside job. He claims that 1 in every 4 Americans believes 9/11 was a conspiracy. He frames Kyle as the actual person responsible for 9/11. This is the lower half of the episode. The upper half is much bigger. Stan and Kyle, fed up with Cartman's nonsense, set out to find out the truth about what really happened on September 11th. They find a 9/11 conspiracy theory website run by a man who insists the government did it. The federal government swoops in and arrests them. They are taken to the White House. President Bush himself walks into the room, and he tells them with full confidence that yes, the government did it. He explains in detail exactly how the attacks were carried out by his administration. He tells them about explosives planted at the base of the towers. He tells them about military jets flown into the buildings. He tells them about cruise missiles fired at the Pentagon. He explains that the whole purpose of the attacks was to give him a reason to invade Iraq and steal the country's oil. The vice president, Dick Cheney, is also in the room, dressed like a hunter and carrying a crossbow. Cheney misses the boys when he tries to shoot them and yells about missing again, which is a direct reference to a real event from earlier that same year, when Cheney had accidentally shot a friend in the face during a quail hunt. For about half the episode, South Park looks like it is endorsing the 9/11 conspiracy theories. The Bush administration is shown openly admitting to the worst possible accusation. This is not subtle. This is the President of the United States on the show confessing to mass murder. Then comes the twist. The boys escape the White House. They run into the conspiracy theorist again, who is supposed to be dead. He admits he is just a pawn. They are taken to the home of an old man, the father of two amateur detectives called the Hardley Boys. The old man explains everything. The conspiracy theory websites are run by the government. The 9/11 conspiracy theories themselves are a government project. The actual attacks were carried out by Al-Qaeda, exactly as the news has been reporting all along. But the government wants Americans to believe that the government is all-powerful, even when the government is the bad guy. So the government plants conspiracy theories. The government wants you to think the government did it because that means the government is in control. A government that secretly killed 3,000 of its own people on television is a more impressive government than a government that got blindsided by 19 men with box cutters. And then Bush appears one more time. He explains it himself. He says that the government tells people the truth all the time. But because 1 in every 4 Americans is, in his words, a moron who believes everything is a conspiracy, the government might as well let those people believe whatever they want. It does not matter what the government says. People who want to believe a conspiracy will believe it. So the government has decided to give them a conspiracy. It is easier than fighting them. That is the argument of the episode. South Park, in a single half hour, manages to attack 9/11 truthers, defend the Bush administration on the actual question of who did 9/11, but also argue that the Bush administration is the kind of government that would happily take credit for a terrorist attack if it made them look more powerful. The show does not pick a side. The show picks all sides at once. The 9/11 truthers are idiots. The government is corrupt. The actual events of 9/11 are exactly what the news said they were, and the country is full of people who would rather believe a story about how the government is all-powerful than believe a story about how the government is just a bunch of confused people who got caught off guard. This is South Park's most complete political statement of the Bush era. It is also the most accurate prediction the show ever made about the future of American politics. Almost 20 years later, the country is more full of conspiracy theories than ever. People believe almost any story that flatters their existing fears about the people in power. The episode saw it coming. The episode named it. The animation in the episode is also quietly important. Bush is drawn with a slightly more cartoon-like face than Clinton ever got. His chin is bigger, his eyes are wider. The animators are putting more visual energy into him because he has more screen time and more lines. He has become, by season 10, a real character in the show, not just a guest star. The transformation that started in the movie has now finished. South Park has a working version of every president it has ever had. It can pull Bush out at any time and use him. By the time the episode aired in October of 2006, Bush was already deeply unpopular. The Iraq War had soured. Hurricane Katrina had damaged his image. The country had moved against him. South Park, which had spent 5 years dealing with him, was tired. Bush would be in office for 2 more years, but the show's biggest Bush statement was already on the screen. After Mystery of the Urinal Deuce, the show began drifting toward what was coming next. A new election, a new candidate, a new kind of political moment. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That moment was the 2008 election. It was the moment America elected its first African-American president. It was supposed to be a turning point, a healing moment, a new beginning. South Park had to figure out how to handle that too. And before they could even get there, they had to handle the 2004 election in between, which would give the show its most famous, most quoted, most permanent political statement. A statement about every election that has ever been held in America, told through the story of 2 of the dumbest, most disgusting candidates anyone has ever voted for. Section 5. Douche and Turd. The 2004 election and the birth of South Park's permanent political worldview. The 2004 election was the first one where the country had to vote during a real war. American troops were in Iraq. American troops were in Afghanistan. Soldiers were dying every week. Bodies were coming home in flag-draped coffins. The country was divided in ways it had not been divided since Vietnam. On one side stood the sitting president, George W. Bush, who had launched the war and was asking the country to stick with him to finish the job. On the other side stood John Kerry, a Democratic senator from Massachusetts who had himself fought in Vietnam, who had then come home and protested that war, and who was now trying to convince Americans that he could be trusted to lead them through this one. The campaign got ugly. There were Swift boat ads. There were debates. There were rallies. Celebrities took sides. Hip-hop artists started a campaign called Vote or Die, designed to scare young people into showing up at the polls. This was the country South Park was watching during the summer and fall of 2004. And on October 27th, 2004, exactly 1 week before Election Day, the show aired its take on the whole thing. The episode was called Douche and Turd. It was the 8th episode of Season 8. It was written by Trey Parker, and it would go on to become one of the most quoted, most referenced, most copied episodes of South Park ever made. 20 years later, every election cycle, somebody on social media would still be sharing clips from this episode. The arguments it makes have become so deeply tied to American political language that the title of the episode is now just a phrase people use to describe their choices on a ballot. The plot of the episode begins at South Park Elementary, where the school is having a pep rally to celebrate its mascot, a cow. Members of the animal rights group PETA show up to protest. They argue that using a cow as a mascot is offensive to cows. The school caves to the pressure and decides to let the students vote on a new mascot. The students are bored by the boring choices the staff offers. So Kyle and Cartman, in a prank, push 2 new candidates onto the ballot. Kyle pushes a giant douche. Cartman pushes a turd sandwich. Both of these are exactly what they sound like. A literal animated giant douche, which is a feminine hygiene product, and a literal animated turd sandwich, which is a piece of bread with poop in it. To everyone's surprise, these 2 joke candidates become the only choices in the election. Every other option drops away. The students of South Park Elementary now have to choose between a giant douche and a turd sandwich. They take it seriously. The cartoon mascots dance and wave at the kids during the campaign. The giant douche dances to the song Get Ready for This by 2 Unlimited. The turd sandwich grooves to Who Let the Dogs Out by the Baha Men. The Cartoon News Network covers the race like a real political event. There's even a debate between the two hosted by the Real News anchor Jim Lehrer, who at the time was the most respected debate moderator in actual American politics. Stan, the moral center of the show, watches all of this happen and decides he does not want to vote. He cannot bring himself to choose between a giant douche and a turd sandwich. Both options are terrible. Both options are gross. Both options are insulting. He decides to sit it out. This is where the episode becomes one of the most ruthless attacks on the act of voting that any American show has ever put on television. Stan is not allowed to sit out. The minute he tells his friends he is not voting, they lose their minds. Kyle yells at him. Cartman mocks him. His parents argue with him at the dinner table. The school administration gets involved. Word spreads through the town that Stan is not voting. And then the pressure gets serious. Sean Combs, the rapper known at the time as Puff Daddy, shows up at Stan's door. He is the cartoon version of the real rapper who in 2004 had launched a real campaign called Vote or Die. The campaign was meant to encourage young people to vote. South Park took that slogan and made it literal. The cartoon Puff Daddy explains his Vote or Die campaign to Stan. Stan asks what it actually means. Puff Daddy pulls out a gun, cocks it, and points it at Stan's head. The joke is that Vote or Die, taken seriously, sounds like a death threat. The cartoon takes the slogan to its real meaning, and it does this through a real celebrity named on the show, played by his cartoon double. Stan, terrified, agrees to vote. He goes to the school and starts to mark his ballot for turd sandwich. Kyle sees him. Kyle freaks out. Kyle demands that Stan vote for giant douche instead. The cartoon spells out the lesson without quite saying it. Stan's friends did not actually want him to vote. They wanted him to vote for their side. The act of voting by itself was not enough. The vote had to be the right vote. And the moment Stan tried to make a different choice, the same friends who had pressured him to participate started pressuring him to participate correctly. Disgusted by the whole thing, Stan refuses to vote at all. The school decides he must be punished. He is publicly shamed in front of the whole town. He is tied up with a bucket placed over his head. He is sat on the back of a horse. The horse is slapped on the rear and runs out of town carrying Stan with it. The townspeople wave him off, satisfied that the man who would not vote has been driven out of their community. This sequence is not subtle. South Park is comparing the way Americans treat people who refuse to vote to the way old societies used to banish people for crimes. The episode is making the argument that voting in America has stopped being a choice and has started being a kind of test of moral worth. If you vote, you are a good person. If you do not vote, you are a traitor and a coward, and you should be run out of town on a horse with a bucket on your head. The cartoon makes the argument by simply showing it. No speech, no lecture, just the picture. Stan ends up at a commune full of PETA members. They have been living in what they call perfect harmony with animals, which the show reveals to mean they are sleeping with and marrying farm animals. There are half-human, half-animal hybrid children running around the commune. One of these hybrids, a small bird-human creature, begs to be killed. The PETA people are not the heroes of this episode. They are presented as just as crazy as everyone else. But it is at this commune that Stan finally hears the line that the entire episode is built around. A PETA member sits him down and explains American politics to him. The line is the heart of the show's worldview. The PETA member tells Stan that nearly every election since the beginning of time has been between some douche and some turd. Those are the only kinds of people, the member explains, who suck up enough to make it that far in politics. Anyone who really wanted to do good would never be willing to do the things you have to do to win an election. So the people who win are always the ones who do not actually deserve to. That is the line. That is the South Park theory of American politics. It does not matter who is in office. It does not matter what party they belong to. It does not matter what year it is. The choice is always between two awful people, because awful people are the only ones who are willing to play the game well enough to reach the top. This idea, dropped into a cartoon mascot election in 2004, became the show's permanent worldview. Every election South Park covered after this one would echo this idea. The 2008 episode would suggest that both candidates were secretly criminals. The 2012 episode would suggest that the entire election was being decided by a deal involving Star Wars. The 2016 episode would put Trump and Hillary Clinton up against each other and call them the same names from this episode, giant douche and turd sandwich, applied directly to a real presidential race 12 years later. The show never let the line die. The line is the show's mission statement. Back in the episode, things get worse before they get better. Puff Daddy and his crew show up at the PETA commune to find Stan and finish their mission. The PETA members, seeing Puff Daddy in a fur coat, throw red paint on him as a protest. Puff Daddy responds by killing every PETA member in the compound. The cartoon shows a massacre. Puff Daddy's Vote or Die campaign turns into actual murder. Stan escapes in the chaos. He returns to South Park. When he gets home, the town welcomes him back. He is forgiven. He has come around. He is going to vote after all. With everyone watching, Stan walks into the polling place and casts his vote for Turd Sandwich. The other students cheer. Then the results come in. Turd Sandwich gets 36 votes. Giant Douche gets 1,410 votes. Stan's vote did not matter. Even if every Turd Sandwich voter had stayed home, Giant Douche still would have won by a huge margin. Stan's choice changed nothing. His one vote, which the entire town had been willing to threaten his life over, made no difference at all. And then, the final twist. The school announces that since the entire local PETA chapter is now dead, the protest against the cow mascot is over. The school will keep the cow as the mascot. The election was pointless. The whole exercise was for nothing. Stan was banished, threatened, and almost killed for his vote in an election whose result was meaningless, and whose result also did not actually matter, because the original problem the election was supposed to solve had already been solved by other means. Randy, Stan's father, walks over to him in the final scene. He looks proud. He tells Stan that voicing his opinion through voting matters, even when his choice did not win. Then, the news of the PETA massacre hits the family. Randy realizes that everything Stan went through was for an election that has now been canceled. Randy turns to a silent, fuming Stan and says in the most devastating final line the show could have written, that now your vote does not matter. The episode aired 1 week before Bush won re-election over Kerry. The country went on with the business of being the country, but the cartoon had said its piece. South Park's argument was on the record. American elections were a choice between two terrible people. Voting in them was an empty ritual. Pressuring other people to vote was a kind of bullying, and the entire system was being run by people who would happily kill anyone who got in their way. The episode is sometimes called the most clear-eyed political statement the show ever made. It has been used in college classes about voter behavior. It has been quoted by libertarian writers as the perfect summary of how they see politics. It has been mocked by people who hate the show as the kind of cynical thinking that keeps people away from the polls and lets bad things happen. Both of those reactions are real. Both of those reactions miss what the episode is actually doing. The episode is not telling you not to vote. The episode is telling you that the people pressuring you to vote do not actually care about your vote. They care about your vote being for their side. The moment you do not vote for their side, you become the enemy. The episode is about the social pressure around voting voting, not about voting itself. That argument has aged in strange ways. In 2004, it felt sharp. In 2008, it felt right on. In 2016, it felt like the show had predicted the entire election. By the time the second Trump term started in 2025, the episode had become so famous that even people who had never seen it were using its language to describe their own elections. The phrase giant douche and turd sandwich entered the American vocabulary. People used it without knowing where it came from. The episode had won. The argument had spread. After douche and turd, the show kept dealing with the Bush years for the rest of his presidency. There were small Bush appearances here and there. There were episodes about the Iraq War. There were episodes about the country's mood. But the show had already made its biggest political argument. Everything else was just expanding on it. The framework was set. The voice was set. The worldview was set. South Park, 8 years into its run, knew what it thought about American elections. And the country was about to give the show its biggest test yet. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Because in 2008, the country was going to elect a man who was being treated by his supporters like a kind of savior. A man whose election was being framed as the most important election in a generation. A man who would bring the country together after 8 years of George W. Bush. A man who, in many people's minds, was going to fix everything. The country was about to fall in love with a candidate. South Park, with its theory that every election was between a douche and a turd, was about to find out whether that theory still held when the country was ready to crown a hero. Section 6. The Obama Years. Part 1. About last night and the show that mocked both sides equally. The night of November 4th, 2008 was one of those nights that felt different. Barack Obama had won the presidency. He was going to be the first African-American president in the history of the country. Crowds gathered in Chicago to celebrate. Crowds gathered in Times Square. Crowds gathered in front of the White House, drinking and singing and crying. On the other side, Republican voters sat in their living rooms in shock. John McCain had given his concession speech. The cable news networks were showing wall-to-wall coverage of Obama supporters dancing in the streets. The country, depending on which side you were on, felt either reborn or doomed. There was no middle ground that night. Everyone was either celebrating or grieving. South Park had a problem. Election episodes for South Park had always been about predicting the joke before the country knew what the joke was. The 2000 episode aired during the recount. The 2004 episode aired 1 week before the vote. Each time, Parker and Stone had stayed ahead of the country, getting the cartoon out the door before the news cycle had finished its first lap. For 2008, they wanted to do it again. They wanted to air the episode the night after the election. That meant they had to commit, before the vote happened, to a winner. Trey Parker was so confident that Obama would win that he had bet money on it. He used a sports betting website that he normally used for football. The website had Obama as a heavy favorite. Parker took the bet. He won. That confidence allowed the show to do what it did next. The episode they made was called About Last Night. It aired on November 5th, 2008. That is less than 24 hours after Obama had been declared the winner. The episode used real audio from Obama's victory speech and from McCain's concession speech, both of which had happened the night before. The show had less than a day between the speeches and the broadcast. The animators worked through the night. The episode was on television by Wednesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Nothing else on television in any format could match that. South Park had built its production system to be able to do exactly this kind of turnaround, and the 2008 election episode is one of the best examples of why that system mattered. The episode opens like a documentary. The townspeople of South Park are gathered around their televisions watching the election results come in. Randy Marsh, drunk before the votes are even counted, is celebrating. Sharon, his wife, is celebrating. The Broflovskis are celebrating. The town's Democrats are calling Obama the Messiah. They are crying. They are hugging each other. They are screaming about change. On the other side of town, the Republicans of South Park are in a totally different state. The Stotch family, Mr. Garrison, Mr. Mackey, and others are sitting inside, certain that the world is about to end. They are not celebrating. They are not grieving in a normal way. They are panicking. They are talking about the apocalypse. They are convinced that an Obama presidency means the literal end of civilization. The show pushes both sides into cartoon extremes. Randy gets so drunk that he punches his boss in the face, who happens to also be an Obama supporter. The boss fires him the next morning. Other Obama supporters in the town become violent and chaotic, tipping over Officer Barbrady's police car when he tries to restore order, accusing him of being a Republican because he is asking them to calm down. Meanwhile, on the Republican side, Ike Broflovsky, who is established in this episode as a McCain supporter, jumps out a first-floor window in a suicide attempt. The Stotches start building a literal ark to ride out what they believe will will be the end of the world. The town's Republican voters in this version are not just sad, they are getting ready for the end times. This is South Park doing something that very few American shows were willing to do in November of 2008. The country had spent the entire campaign year framing the Obama election as a turning point. Liberal voters were treated, by the press and by themselves, as the heroes of a story. Conservative voters were treated as the people on the wrong side of history. South Park, in 22 minutes, said both sides were ridiculous. The Democrats were drunk maniacs. The Republicans were apocalypse cultists. Neither group was behaving like a normal adult. Neither group had a real understanding of what had just happened. The episode could have stopped there and still been one of the most balanced takes on the 2008 election made by anyone. But the show had a much weirder plan in mind. The actual plot of the episode is about something nobody was expecting. It turns out, in the world of South Park, that Barack Obama and John McCain are not actually political enemies. They are best friends. They are part of an elite team of professional thieves. The entire 2008 presidential campaign was a setup for a heist. The plan was simple. One of them had to win the election. Whichever one won would be granted access to the Oval Office, which contains a secret tunnel that leads directly to the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. Once inside the tunnel, the winning team can break into the museum, steal the Hope Diamond, and escape before anyone notices. This whole subplot is a parody of the heist movie Ocean's 11, with little touches from another heist film called Entrapment. Sarah Palin, McCain's running mate in real life, is revealed to be part of the heist team. In the cartoon, she is a brilliant, calm, articulate Englishwoman who only pretends to be a clueless American politician. Michelle Obama is also in on it. The cartoon version of her is a master computer hacker, single mother of two, who only pretends to be Obama's wife to make him more electable. Even Ike Broflovsky, who in this episode jumped out the window and faked an injury, turns out to be a member of the heist team. He was placed in South Park as an inside man. Every part of the campaign, every part of the public story, every relationship the candidates appeared to have was fake. The heist itself happens during the celebrations. While the Democrats are partying in the streets and the Republicans are hiding in their ark, Obama and Michelle break into the Smithsonian. They cross a room full of laser security beams. They steal the Hope Diamond. Ike, working from inside the South Park hospital, blows up a private jet that contains dummies of the criminals. He alters the hospital records to declare the entire team legally dead. The plan works perfectly. The next morning, the team gathers at Washington Dulles Airport, ready to leave the country forever. Obama announces that he is not going with them. He has decided that he wants to actually try being a real president. He asks Michelle if she wants to come back to the White House with him and pretend to be the first family for a while. She and her two daughters agree. Obama walks back into government, having stolen the most valuable diamond in the world, with no intention of giving it back, but with full intention of taking the job seriously. This is the show's argument about Obama in his very first appearance as president. He is a thief who decided to try being a leader. He is a con man who got curious about the job. He is a man whose entire campaign was a lie, but who might still do good work because the lie was the only way to get him into a position where he could try. That is, by South Park standards, a surprisingly generous take. The show is suggesting that even if every politician is a crook, even if every campaign is fake, even if the entire system is built on the kind of cynicism that the douche and turd episode laid out, there might still be a person inside the system who decides on their own to try to be a real president. That person might still be a thief. That person might still have done terrible things to get the job, but they might still try. The town wakes up the next morning. The Republicans climb out of their ark. They look around. Civilization has not ended. The world has not collapsed. The sun has come up. They look a little embarrassed. They decide to give Obama a chance because if he turns out to be bad, they can always vote him out later. The Democrats wake up with hangovers. Randy realizes his pants are missing and his television is missing, both of which were stolen during the night by Cartman, who was using the chaos as cover to steal televisions from people's houses. Randy finds out he has been fired from his job. He blames Obama for all of it. He decides he should have voted for McCain. This last note is the show's punchline on the whole episode. The night of celebration is followed by a morning where the people who voted for Obama feel cheated and the people who voted against Obama feel relieved. Both reactions, the show is suggesting, are funny. Both reactions are based on nothing. Obama has not actually done anything yet. He has been president for less than 24 hours. The country has already decided how it feels about him. The country is wrong on both sides. The episode aired and was loved by people on both sides of the aisle, which is the strange thing about the show's most successful political episodes. Liberals saw the episode as making fun of the panicking Republicans. Conservatives saw the episode as making fun of the drunken Democrats. Both groups were right. The show had aimed at both both targets equally. Nobody was spared. Nobody got the comfortable feeling of watching their own side win. The show kept going with Obama for the rest of his presidency, but it never quite hit the same note again. The truth is, Obama was a hard president for South Park to satirize. He did not give the show a lot to work with. He was calm. He was professional. He spoke in full sentences. He did not have hot tub scandals like Clinton. He did not have wars of choice like Bush. He did not, at least in the early years, have any of the things that South Park's comedy machine ran on. The show needed extreme behavior to make jokes. Obama did not provide much, so the show kept Obama as a small character. He showed up here and there. In a season 13 episode called Margaritaville, the news credits him for fixing the economy after Kyle has actually done all the work. The joke is about how the media gives Obama credit for things he did not do. In season 14, in Eat, Pray, Queef, a Terrence and Phillip episode includes a moment where one of them farts on Obama, who is shown in a photograph and revealed to actually be a Canadian actor. Once again, the show is poking at how the country sees him. He looks one way, but the cartoon suggests he might be another way. But the big political moments during the Obama years happened around him, not to him. The Tea Party movement happened. The Affordable Care Act passed. There were government shutdowns. There were fights about birth certificates. South Park rarely engaged with any of these directly. The show drifted away from political episodes for most of the Obama era. The show found other things to focus on. Randy Marsh became a bigger character. The boys grew into more complicated stories. The show experimented with longer plots that ran across multiple episodes. The political voice that had been so sharp during the Bush years went quiet. There was one more big Obama election episode 4 years later in 2012. It was called Obama Wins. It aired on November 7th, 2012, the day after Obama beat Mitt Romney for re-election. In this episode, Cartman has been stealing ballots in swing states. He has them all hidden in a Hummer. He is using them as a bargaining chip. China, in the cartoon, wants to buy the Star Wars franchise from George Lucas. Cartman wants to be in the next Star Wars movie. The cartoon Morgan Freeman shows up to narrate everything in his Morgan Freeman voice, gaining a new freckle every time he explains something. By the end of the episode, Mickey Mouse arrives in a Star Wars ship to take Cartman away. Stan burns the ballots, Obama's re-election is preserved, the episode ends with everyone holding hands and an image of Obama appearing in the smoke. The 2012 episode is a goofier, smaller version of the 2008 one. It does not have the same bite. The country did not have the same energy around the 2012 election. Obama winning a second term was not the cultural earthquake that his first win had been. The show responded with a smaller, weirder, less political episode. The pattern of the Obama years had set in. The show would touch politics now and then, but its real attention was elsewhere. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That distance the show kept from Obama is itself the story. The show that had defined itself with Bush. The show that had built its political voice on Iraq and 9/11 and the douche and the turd mostly stepped back when Obama was in office. There is a reason for that. There is something the show could not quite figure out about a president who, on the surface, did not seem to be doing the things the show usually mocked. And the answer to why South Park did not know what to do with Obama tells you a lot about what the show needed in order to function. It tells you what kind of president the show was built to attack. And it tells you why, when the next president came along, the show would suddenly catch fire again, in ways that nobody could have predicted. Section 7, The Obama Years, Part 2, Why Obama Got Off Easy and What That Reveals About the Show. The Obama years were 8 years long, 2 full terms, from January of 2009 to January of 2017. Over those 8 years, South Park aired more than 100 episodes. And in those 100 plus episodes, Barack Obama appears as a real cartoon character with actual lines of dialogue maybe a dozen times. Most of those appearances are short, a line here, a scene there, a few seconds of him on a television screen in the background. Compare that to George W. Bush, who got an entire half hour built around a confession that he masterminded the September 11th attacks. Compare that to Bill Clinton, who got a full speech in the South Park movie declaring war on Canada in his own voice. Compare that to Donald Trump, who would later get whole episodes built around him as a character, sometimes appearing in nearly every scene. Obama did not get any of that. The show kept him at a distance. The show, which had built its political muscle by going hard at presidents, mostly let this one go. And the reason why is one of the most interesting things you can learn about how South Park actually works. The simple version of the answer is this: South Park needs an enemy. The whole comedy engine of the show runs on extremes. Mr. Garrison saying terrible things, Cartman doing terrible things, Randy losing his mind in front of his family, Mr. Mackey getting angry about a urinal. The show works when characters behave in ways that go far past what regular people would do, and the audience laughs because the cartoon has gone somewhere a real person could never go. That same logic applies to politics politicians on the show. Clinton works as a comedy character because the show can put him in a hot tub with Cartman's mother. Bush works as a comedy character because the show can have him confess to terrorist attacks. Both presidents gave the show something to push against. Both had personal weaknesses, public scandals, or controversial decisions that the show could blow up to cartoon size. Obama did not give the show much to work with. He was a calm public speaker. He gave speeches in long, careful sentences. He did not have a sex scandal. He did not start a war that split the country in half the way Iraq had. He had personal habits that were boring by South Park standards. He played basketball. He read books. He had a normal-looking marriage. His 2 kids were well-behaved and stayed mostly out of the news. The kinds of things the show could exaggerate were thin on the ground. Obama, simply by being a person who did not do the things South Park usually targeted, became a hard target. The other big factor is that South Park changed during the Obama years. The show that had been so loud and political under Bush quieted down. Parker and Stone, by their own accounts in interviews, were tired of being the political show. They had said what they wanted to say about American politics. The country had moved on from the Bush era. The energy had drained out of cable news a little. The show started caring about other things. Randy Marsh, Stan's dad, took over more and more of the focus. He started getting full episodes built around him. Episodes like You're Getting Old, Funny Bot, Royal Pudding, and TMI shifted the show's attention to family stuff, internet stuff, pop culture stuff, and the strange daily lives of the South Park townspeople. Politics became a small piece of the show, not the main piece. Where Obama did show up, the appearances were strange and revealing. In a season 13 episode called Margaritaville, which aired on March 25, 2009, the country is in the middle of a financial crisis. The episode is mostly about Randy starting a cult that worships the economy as if it were an angry god. At the end, Kyle saves the economy by going into massive personal debt to buy back what other people had owed. He pays off everyone's bills. The economy starts working again. But the news, when reporting the recovery, gives Obama all the credit. Kyle is left ignored. The joke is that Obama, just by being in office, gets credit for things he did not actually do. The country wants to give him credit. The country has decided he is the hero. The cartoon Kyle, the actual hero, is invisible to the news cameras. South Park, in this small moment, is making a sharp observation about how the early Obama years had a kind of hero worship mood around them. The president did not have to do the work. The country was so excited that he existed that they would credit him for anything good that happened. That same idea keeps coming up in small ways. In season 14's 1%, Cartman blames Obama for the presidential fitness test, which is a real thing kids take in American gym classes. The joke is that Cartman is the kind of person who blames Obama for everything, including things that have nothing to do with him. The show is making fun of both the worship of Obama and the hatred of Obama at the same time. The man himself almost does not matter. The country has decided what he is. The country yells at him or cheers for him without checking what he has actually done. In season 14's Eat, Pray, Queef, a Canadian episode of Terrence and Phillip, features one of them farting directly into Obama's face. A photograph of Obama is shown, and the joke implies that the cartoon Obama is actually played by a Canadian actor, the same way Terrence and Phillip themselves are Canadian. South Park is suggesting that Obama might be too good to be true. He looks like a real American president, but maybe he is just a performance. Maybe he is somebody pretending to be that calm, that smooth, that put together. The show plants the idea without committing to it. There is one Obama appearance that shows just how minor he became to the show. In season 15's Asperger's, which aired on October 5th, 2011, Obama appears for only a few seconds near the end of the episode. The whole episode is about Stan dealing with depression and feeling like everything in the world has become hollow. Obama is there for almost no reason. He shows up, says a line, and leaves. The President of the United States gets less screen time in this episode than a fast food chain. That is the level of attention South Park gave Obama in his middle years. He was background. The 2012 election episode, Obama Wins, that was covered in the last section, is the one big exception. That episode put Obama in the center for once. But even there, the show is more interested in Cartman's deal with Mickey Mouse and the Chinese to control the Star Wars franchise than in actually saying anything about Obama himself. Obama wins the election. The cartoon ends with everyone joining hands and chanting around an image of him appearing in the smoke. The smoke ending is a kind of mockery of how the country had treated his original 2008 victory, with all the spiritual language and savior comparisons. The show is reminding the audience that this was, in the end, just an election. The smoke fades. The country goes back to its life. There is another reason South Park might have backed off Obama, and it is harder to talk about. Obama was the first African-American president. The country was sensitive about jokes that could be read as racist. Parker and Stone had spent the entire show pushing against against that kind of sensitivity, but they also knew where the lines were. Making the kind of cruel, personal jokes about Obama that they had made about Clinton would have looked very different than making them about Clinton. The cultural meaning of the jokes was different. The risk was different. The show pulled back. Whether they did it on purpose or just felt their way into a quieter approach, the result is the same. The first African-American president got the lightest treatment any modern president has gotten on the show. What South Park did focus on during the Obama years was something else entirely. The show became deeply interested in long stories that played out across multiple episodes. Season 18, which aired in 2014, is the first season where every single episode connects to the next. Characters change, plot lines develop, Cartman gets a girlfriend, Randy turns out to be a pop star named Lord, PC Principal arrives at South Park Elementary, whole new arcs of the show begin. None of these arcs are about Obama. None of them are really about politics in the old sense. South Park had grown into a different kind of show. Season 19 in 2015 takes that same long story approach and applies it to something that finally feels political again. The whole season becomes about political correctness, gentrification, internet advertising, and the cultural mood of the country. The show finds a new enemy. The new enemy is not a president. The new enemy is the way Americans have started talking to each other in public. PC Principal becomes one of the most important characters in the season. Whole episodes go after the way college campuses, social media platforms, and corporate brands have started using the language of politeness as a weapon. South Park has woken up again, but this time the politics is about culture, not about the man in the White House. The Obama years also give the show its first taste of something that would matter a lot later. The show starts caring about media itself, about internet platforms, about how news is made, about how stories spread. Cartoon characters get internet identities. Trolling becomes a major plot device. Online attention becomes its own subject. South Park is figuring out in real time that the political battles of the future are not going to be fought between presidents and Congress. They are going to be fought between regular people on the internet, and the president is going to be the loudest voice in the noise. That is the most important thing the Obama years did for the show. They forced South Park to look past the president. They forced the show to look at the country instead. The president became one piece of a much bigger picture. The cable news shouting matches, the social media wars, the protest movements, the cultural fights about who is allowed to say what, all of that became the show's new playground. Obama was just the man on the screen behind it all. He was not driving the comedy, he was decoration. In the show's defense, this turn worked out for the long run. By the time the show needed to handle politics again at full intensity, around 2015 and 2016, the show had already built up the tools to do it. Season 19's deep dive into political correctness gave the show the language it would need for Season 20. The internet trolling stories of Season 20 fed directly into the show's takes on the 2016 election. None of that work would have happened if the show had stayed focused on the man in the Oval Office. The Obama years were a quiet stretch for the show on the surface. Underneath, the show was changing shape. There is one more thing worth saying about the Obama era. It is the only stretch of South Park's run, between 1997 and now, where the show did not have a clear political opponent. Clinton was a political opponent because of his personal life. Bush was a political opponent because of the Iraq War. Trump would later be a political opponent because of, well, everything Trump did. Obama did not give the show a clear thing to be against. The show's response was to retreat from politics for most of the period. That tells you something about how the show actually works. It does not have a fixed political party it is trying to attack. It does not have a fixed ideology it is trying to push. It has a button. The button is, somebody is doing something stupid in public and we are going to mock it. When that button is not being pushed by the president, the show looks elsewhere. Obama, by being calm and careful and above the fray, just did not push the button very often. This is what some critics have called the show's libertarian streak. South Park is not Republican. South Park is not Democrat. South Park is something else, something harder to name. It is the voice of someone who thinks all sides are full of nonsense, that the people who speak the loudest are usually wrong, and that the country would be better off if everyone just calmed down. That voice cannot really attack a president who already seems calm. It can only attack the people around him who are not calm. So the show spent the Obama years going after those people instead. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. By the time Obama's second term was winding down, the country was already starting to look ahead to the next election. New candidates were forming. Old candidates were dusting themselves off. The Republican Party was about to have an unusual primary season. A reality television star was thinking about running. A senator from Vermont was thinking about challenging the Democratic nominee. many. A familiar last name was about to come back into the national conversation. South Park, in 2015, watched all of this with new eyes. The show that had quieted down during the Obama years was about to get loud again, and the way it would do that was by taking a character who had been on the show for almost 20 years, a character that the audience thought they knew, and turning him into something nobody saw coming. A character who would, before the country had even decided who its next president would be running for the office himself. Section 8. Mr. Garrison becomes Trump. Where My Country Gone and the 2016 Disaster. Mr. Herbert Garrison had been on South Park since the very first episode in 1997. He started as the boys' third-grade teacher, a strange man with a hand puppet named Mr. Hat that he used to say things he was too afraid to say himself. Over the years, Garrison had been through more changes than any other character on the show. He had come out as gay, he had gotten a sex change and become a woman named Janet, he had gotten a second sex change and gone back to being a man. He had taught kindergarten, he had taught 4th grade, he had been fired and rehired, he had a long-running, troubled relationship with his own identity. By 2015, Garrison had been so many things on the show that the audience had basically stopped being surprised by him. He was just there, a familiar, unstable, slightly insane background figure. Nobody expected him to become the most important character of the next 8 years. Then, on September 23rd, 2015, an episode aired called Where My Country Gone. It was the second episode of season 19, and in 22 minutes, Mr. Garrison became something the show had never had before. He became a stand-in for a real person who was, at that exact moment, taking over the news in America. He became Donald Trump. The setup is clever. The episode begins by making the audience think Mr. Garrison is angry about Mexicans, the same way he had been in earlier seasons. He starts a speech in his classroom about how immigrants are ruining the country. The audience expects the punchline to land on Mexicans, because that has been Garrison's pattern before. Then the show flips it. The immigrants Garrison is angry about are not Mexicans. They are Canadians. Canadian families have been pouring into South Park, putting their children in the local schools and disrupting Garrison's classroom. Garrison cannot stand them. He yells at the Canadian kids. He calls them by a slur. He gets sent to the principal's office. PC Principal, who had been introduced earlier in season 19 as a man obsessed with politically correct language, forces Garrison to take a class to learn the Canadian language so he can better understand his Canadian students. Garrison sits through the class hating every minute of it. Then, in his own daydream, he comes up with a plan. He starts singing a song. The song asks where his country has gone. He begins rallying the people of South Park to support him. He gives speeches. He gets crowds excited. His message is simple. The country is being taken over by Canadians. America is no longer America. The only solution is to do something dramatic about it. His proposal is one of the show's most uncomfortable moments. He suggests that the answer to the Canadian problem is to round them up and, in his own words, just have sex with them until they die. He says it casually. He says it in front of a town hall. The crowd cheers him on. The show is making the joke that Garrison's voice has tapped into something the audience already recognizes. He is saying ugly things in plain language, and the people listening are loving him for it. The show does not lecture the audience about why this is bad. The show just shows it. Garrison's crowd grows. His support grows. His confidence grows. Then he announces that he will build a wall, a literal wall, on the border between the United States and Canada to keep the Canadians out. The town backs him completely. They start drafting the plans. By this point in the episode, anyone watching in 2015 understood exactly what the show was doing. Donald Trump had announced his run for president in June of that year. He had famously called for a wall along the southern border with Mexico. He had said inflammatory things about Mexican immigrants. His campaign slogan was "Make America Great Again." The cartoon Garrison wears a baseball cap with the slogan "Where My Country Gone" written on it. The cap is shaped exactly like Trump's red "Make America Great Again" hat. The crowds cheer for Garrison the way Trump's crowds cheered for him at his rallies. The show is not hiding what it is doing. The show is openly making the connection. Mr. Garrison, the deeply unstable South Park elementary school teacher, has become the cartoon version of the man running for president. The episode keeps going. Garrison goes to the border to start building his wall. He discovers to his shock that Canada has already built a wall. The Canadians had built it themselves to keep Americans out and to protect, in their words, the cool stuff Canada has. Garrison cannot get into Canada. He has to sneak in. He goes over Niagara Falls in a barrel. He arrives in Canada bruised and angry. What he finds in Canada is the second twist of the episode. The country is in ruins, empty streets, broken buildings, a wasteland. Garrison asks what happened. He is told that during the most recent Canadian election, a candidate had run on a platform of saying outrageous things and never offering real solutions. The voters thought it would be funny to vote for him. They let the joke go on too long. He won. By the time anyone realized he was actually going to be in charge, it was too late. The country fell apart. The Canadian government collapsed under the weight of the joke president that Canadians had elected. The Canadian president that Garrison meets is also a parody of Donald Trump, right down to the hair, right down to the loud, brash, big-talking style. The cartoon is making the argument out loud. The candidate Garrison is becoming, the candidate American voters are starting to take seriously, is the same kind of candidate that ruined Canada. The show is warning the audience. The show is begging the audience to see what is coming. The show, on September 23rd, 2015, more than a year before the actual election, is saying out loud that this is what happens when a country lets a man like this win. Garrison and the Canadian Trump get into a screaming argument. It ends with Garrison killing the Canadian president in a horrible, dark scene. The Canadian people, hearing that their president is dead, all decide to move back to Canada. Their immigration problem solves itself. Garrison returns to South Park as a hero. He has, in the eyes of the town, fixed the Canadian problem. He gives a speech to the town announcing what he plans to do next. He is going to run for President of the United States. His running mate, he announces, will be Caitlyn Jenner. The two of them get into a car and drive off toward Washington. On the way out, the cartoon Caitlyn Jenner runs over a pedestrian. Nobody in the cartoon cares about the death. The show ends with Garrison heading off to run for the most powerful office in the world, with a running mate who has just killed someone, while everyone in the town smiles and waves. That episode aired in September of 2015. The actual American presidential election was in November of 2016. South Park, in its predictable way, planned to ride the campaign for the entire next year. Season 20, which began airing in September of 2016, was built around the assumption that Hillary Clinton was going to win the election in November. Parker and Stone had been so confident in 2008 that Obama would win, they were just as confident in 2016 that Hillary would win. The whole season was built on that assumption. The first episode of season 20 was called Member Berries, and it aired on September 14th, 2016. The episode brings back the douche and turd language from 2004 and applies it directly to the real candidates. Mr. Garrison, the cartoon Trump, is referred to as the giant douche. Hillary Clinton is referred to as the turd sandwich. The show is recycling its own 12-year-old framework and pointing it at a real election. The episode also introduces the member berries, which are small berries that whisper nostalgic memories into people's ears. The berries make people think about how things used to be in the past, in a way that feels comforting but also a little dark. The people of South Park start eating the berries and start losing their grip on reality. The whole season uses the member berries as a metaphor for nostalgia in politics. The idea that voters were being fed memories of an imaginary good past that Trump's campaign was promising to bring back. The season was building toward what was supposed to be its big payoff. Mr. Garrison, having lost his nerve about wanting to be president, was going to start trying to lose the election on purpose. He would say even more outrageous things, hoping voters would reject him. The plan was for Hillary Clinton to win. The episode that was going to air the night after the election was already mostly written. It had a title. The title was The Very First Gentleman. Bill Clinton was going to be the focus, dealing with the awkward role of being the husband of the new female president. The episode was going to make jokes about him being the first man to hold that strange supporting role. Most of the animation was done. The story was set. Then, on the night of November 8th, 2016, Donald Trump won the election. Parker and Stone had to throw out a huge chunk of their episode. They had less than 24 hours to fix it. They worked through the night. They rewrote scenes. They re-recorded dialogue. They reanimated parts of the episode. The new version was titled Oh Geez. It aired on November 9th, 2016. The production officially wrapped only 9 hours before the episode went on the air. The new version of the episode is one of the strangest things South Park has ever broadcast. It feels like a show that has just been hit by a truck. The plot is broken in the middle. The first half clearly assumes Hillary won. The second half is a desperate rewrite trying to deal with the actual result. Garrison, who has been trying to lose the election all season, is shown in shock that he won. He gives a confused, dazed speech accepting the presidency. He embraces his victory even though he had spent all season trying to throw it. The member berries that have been poisoning the town are now openly mind-controlling people, making them accept the new reality of a Garrison presidency. The single most haunting moment of the episode happens at the dinner table in the Marsh family home. Randy, who has been resisting the member all season, has finally given in. He looks at his daughter Shelly, who is a teenager. He says to to her in the calmest voice the show has ever given him that women can be anything they want to be, except for president. The cartoon delivers the line with no fanfare. No music sting, no big reaction, it just lands. The line was originally meant to be a different joke. It became, in the rewrite, the most accurate emotional summary of what had just happened to half the country. Half of America had spent 8 years telling young girls they could grow up to be anything, including the president. The country had then turned around and said no. The line was not meant to be that brutal. The night made it that brutal. Trey Parker and Matt Stone have admitted in interviews afterward that they did not know what to do. They had built the entire season around the idea of a Hillary win. They had built the entire campaign of Mr. Garrison around the idea that the joke would end on November 8th, 2016, and the show could move on. The joke did not end. The joke became the country. They were stuck with Mr. Garrison as president, as their cartoon stand-in for Donald Trump for the next 4 years. They had not planned for that, they had not wanted that, but they had no choice. The show would now have to figure out how to make jokes about a man who, in the cartoon world they had built, looked exactly like Mr. Garrison. That choice would haunt them. The cartoon Trump they had created was not a real cartoon Trump. It was a teacher named Garrison wearing a Trump-style wig. It was a character with 20 seasons of history that did not match the real Donald Trump. Every joke they made about President Garrison would be about Garrison, not about Trump. The show had built a Trump-shaped trap for itself, and now they had to live in it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next 4 seasons would test how long Parker and Stone could keep that joke alive. The answer, as it turned out, was not very long. President Garrison would do things the show could barely keep up with. The show would start running out of material. The show would start admitting on screen that the joke had stopped being funny, and the long, slow death of the Garrison-Trump experiment would force Parker and Stone eventually to do something they had never done before, something that would change the entire visual language of the show, and something that would only make sense once they were free to start over. Section 9. The Garrison-Trump era. Nuclear strikes, member berries, and the show running out of material. The 4 years of Donald Trump's first term, from January of 2017 to January of 2021, are the strangest stretch of South Park's run. The show was forced, by its own writing, to keep using Mr. Garrison as the stand-in for the real president. Garrison wore a blonde Trump-style wig now. He had a fake tan that made his face look orange. He was always referred to as the president. His name as a character was barely used during this whole period. Everyone in the cartoon and on screen just called him the president. The show was trying to push the audience to forget, just a little, that this man used to be a teacher in Colorado who had a hand puppet and a sex change. The show wanted you to look at him and see Trump, not Garrison. The problem was Garrison. The show could change his hair. The show could change his clothes. The show could put him in the Oval Office. But the actor voicing him was still Trey Parker, doing the same nasal, slightly whiny voice he had been doing since 1997. The character's history was the same. His personal hang-ups were the same. His 20 seasons of weird behavior were the same. The new president of the United States, in the cartoon, came preloaded with a long history of being a confused, sex-obsessed elementary school teacher. That history did not match the real Donald Trump at all. It bent every joke just slightly out of shape. The show could never quite get the angle right because the figure on screen was not the real target. Season 21, which aired in the fall of 2017, was the first full season of the Garrison-Trump era. The season opened with an episode called White People Renovating Houses, where the people of South Park complained that automated voice assistants like Alexa and Google Home have taken jobs away from poor white men. Garrison shows up briefly. He rants. He yells. He blames everyone. The episode ends with a strange resolution where the unemployed white men get hired to be voice assistants in people's homes, sitting in the corner listening for commands. It is a clever idea, but Garrison's part in it is small. The second episode of season 21 is much sharper. It was called Put It Down. It aired on September 20th, 2017. The plot focuses on Tweak, a high-strung kid who has become deeply anxious about what President Garrison is doing in office. In real life, in the fall of 2017, Donald Trump was tweeting threats at North Korea. The threats were intense. The country was, briefly, worried about the possibility of nuclear war for the first time in decades. Tweak, on the cartoon, watches the news and starts screaming during a school assembly about the world ending. His boyfriend Craig tries to calm him down. The boys come up with a plan to send cupcakes to Kim Jong-un to make him feel better. The episode also has another running joke. President President Garrison on the show is constantly tweeting. His tweets are insulting and reckless. People are getting into car accidents because they are reading his tweets while driving. The episode shows a school crossing guard hit by a car. A kid is hit by a car. The cartoon argues very directly that Garrison's tweets are killing people, not because of war, because the tweets themselves are so distracting that the entire country is crashing into things while reading them. Tweek and Craig sing a song together at the end of the episode. The song is just 2 words, repeated over and over. Put it down. Put your phone down. Stop reading his tweets. Stop letting him into your head every minute of the day. The song is sad. The song is calm. The song is a kind of quiet plea from the cartoon to the audience. The episode does not preach at anyone. It just suggests, very gently, that maybe the way to survive this presidency is to stop paying so much attention to it. That message was not what most viewers expected from South Park. The show was telling people to disengage, to stop following the news so closely, to put their phones down. It was almost the opposite of what most political shows were doing at the time. Most political shows wanted you to pay more attention. South Park wanted you to pay less. A few episodes later, the show went much darker. The 7th episode of season 21 was called Doubling Down. It aired on November 8th, 2017. The whole episode is about Cartman's terrible relationship with his girlfriend, Heidi. Cartman has been treating her badly. She has been making excuses for him. The cartoon uses the relationship as a comparison to how some Trump voters were defending the president no matter what he did. The more bad behavior the man at the top showed, the more his supporters doubled down. The episode is rough to watch. Cartman is at his cruelest. Heidi keeps defending him. The whole episode is uncomfortable. In the side story, Garrison is dealing with the fact that his approval ratings are very low. 3 of his staff members try to talk to him about it. They want him to change. They want him to stop doing the things that are making people hate him. Garrison's response is one of the show's most disturbing visuals. He brings them a cake to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of his presidency. Then he reveals that he is wearing a giant strap-on dildo. He tells them the next 3 years will be even better. The implication is clear. Garrison is going to keep doing what he wants. He is going to keep punishing the people around him for telling him otherwise. The cartoon is using the worst possible image to make a point about how some leaders respond to criticism by getting more aggressive, not less. The episode that closed season 21 was called Splatty Tomato. It aired on December 6th, 2017. By this point in the year, in real life, the country was tired. The cartoon admits as much. The whole town of South Park is haunted by sightings of President Garrison wandering around like a horror movie monster. Red balloons with "Make America Great Again" written on them appear in the streets. The kids are scared. The adults are tired. Nobody wants to talk about him anymore. In the same episode, Garrison launches a nuclear bomb at Toronto. He kills more than 1 million Canadians. The Prime Minister of Canada, voiced as Justin Trudeau, demands that Garrison be handed over. The cartoon makes the joke that an American president can casually nuke a major Canadian city, and the show will not even treat it as the main plot of the episode. The nuclear strike happens in the middle of a story about something else. The show is making the argument that the country has become so used to terrible news that even something this big does not feel like the main story anymore. Season 22, in 2018, almost completely dropped Garrison from the show. He appears in only 1 episode all season, in a brief background moment in the season finale, Bike Parade. Parker and Stone had clearly grown tired of the Trump material. They were burned out. The political voice of the show, which had once been so confident, was visibly running out of energy. Other shows on television were doing nightly Trump material. South Park stepped away. The show focused on Randy starting a marijuana farm called Tegrity Farms. The Trump character was barely there. Season 23 in 2019 was even thinner on Trump. The whole season is mostly about Randy and the Tegrity Farm storyline. Garrison shows up here and there, but he is not driving any major plots. The show seemed to have made a decision. They were not going to chase Trump anymore. They were going to let the man do whatever he was going to do, and they were going to focus on other things. Then 2020 happened. The COVID-19 pandemic hit the country in March of 2020. South Park, which had a strict production schedule, had to shut down its studio. Most of season 24 was canceled. Instead of a full season, the show released a single hour-long special. It was called The Pandemic Special, and it aired on September 30th, 2020. The special is a strange one. It deals with the pandemic in a way most shows could not. It shows the boys back in school under strange new rules. Mr. Mackey is forced to wear a uniform like a prison guard. Police are stationed inside the classroom. The kids are kept apart. The town is locked down. Cartman, in this special, has somehow become happier and more comfortable during the pandemic. He loves staying home. He loves not going to school. He becomes a kind of villain inside the school system, fighting against any attempt to reopen. The special's most shocking moment comes at the very end. Garrison, who has barely been in the show for 2 whole seasons, returns. He shows up at a vaccine research lab. The scientists are working on a COVID vaccine using research samples from a small endangered animal called a pangolin. Garrison walks in. He picks up a flamethrower. He sets the pangolin on fire. He kills the scientist holding it. The cartoon clearly suggests Garrison is doing this on purpose to slow down vaccine development. The episode ends with him cheerfully reminding the audience to vote in the upcoming election. It is a brutal final image. The president, on screen, killing the people trying to save the country while telling viewers to vote. The election happened in November of 2020. Joe Biden won. Donald Trump lost. The show, this time, did not air a same night reaction episode. They could not. The studio was still mostly shut down, production was still hampered, the country was still in the middle of a pandemic. Instead, in March of 2021, 2 months after Biden's inauguration, the show aired its second hour-long special. It was called the South Park Q Vaccination Special. It premiered on March 10th, 2021. The special is one of the most layered things the show has ever done. The plot is, on the surface, about the chaotic rollout of the COVID vaccine in the United States. The boys are trying to get vaccines for their teachers so school can reopen. The town is fighting over who gets vaccinated first. There are long lines outside drugstores. There is panic. There is desperation. But the deeper story is about Garrison. The cartoon Trump has come back to South Park, having finished his term as president. He wants his old job as a teacher back. The town hates him. The school refuses to hire him. He cannot get any work. He has been left behind by the country. His only supporters are a family called the Whites. The Whites are deep believers in QAnon, the conspiracy theory movement that had grown up around Trump during his time in office. They build a basement command center covered in conspiracy theory boards. They are dressed like the people who attacked the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021, an event that had happened just 2 months before the episode aired. The cartoon includes a man with a Viking hat covered in fur, a direct reference to one of the most famous people from the Capitol attack. The episode keeps going in unexpected directions. Garrison stumbles into a kind of fourth wall breaking scene where the animation itself starts coming apart. The colors of the cartoon split into separate layers. Characters get pulled out of the frame and reshaped. A character is turned into a giant talking piece of male anatomy. Garrison realizes that there are 2 people in charge of the entire South Park universe. 2 men watching from somewhere outside the cartoon controlling everything. Those 2 men, the show makes clear, are Trey Parker and Matt Stone themselves. The show is putting itself into the cartoon. The QAnon believers in the cartoon turn out to be sort of right. There are Hollywood elites running everything. The elites just happen to be the actual creators of the show. Garrison, faced with the truth, makes a deal. He agrees to do whatever Parker and Stone want in exchange for getting his old life back. The vaccines arrive, the town is saved. Garrison gets to teach again. His final lesson, delivered to the camera, is the one he has learned from his entire experience. Always make sure you are on the side of the people with the most power. That line is the show's quiet admission of how it survived the Trump years. It picked the side that gave it the most freedom to keep working. It made the deals it had to make. It kept producing episodes. It kept the show on the air. The cartoon Garrison is, in this final scene, kind of a stand-in for the show itself. South Park made it through. South Park learned to play the game. South Park survived. The Garrison Trump experiment ended there. He would appear here and there in later seasons, but he never again stood for the president. Trump had left the White House. The cartoon went back to using Garrison for other things. The show breathed out. The country had a new president. The show could try a new approach. The new president was Joe Biden. South Park had a chance to do what it had always done. It had a chance to go after the new man in office. The show could rebuild its political voice from scratch. The show could find a new way to talk about a new president. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What South Park did with Biden over the next 4 years was unlike anything the show had ever done before. The choice was strange. The choice was deliberate. The choice would say more about the show and about the moment America was in than any episode the show would actually air during those years. Section 10, the Biden vacuum and the Trump restoration, Sermon on the Mount and why South Park became Saddam Hussein. Joe Biden was president of the United States from January 20th, 2021 to January 20th, 2025. 4 full years. During those 4 years, South Park aired only a small number of new episodes and specials. The show had slowed way down. Parker and Stone Stone had signed a huge deal with Paramount Plus in August of 2021 worth hundreds of millions of dollars to produce streaming specials in addition to the regular show. The new schedule meant fewer regular seasons. The pandemic had also damaged the show's old production pace. Where the show had once made 14 episodes a year, now it was making maybe 5 or 6 full new things in a year, between the regular season and the streaming specials. In all of that work, across all 4 years of the Biden presidency, Joe Biden himself appears as a real character on the show exactly 0 times. Not once. The man who held the highest office in the country, the man whose face was on the news every single day, the man whose policies were being argued about constantly, never appears as a cartoon character on South Park while he was the sitting president. The only Biden footage that exists in the South Park universe is from a deleted scene, never aired, from the 2008 episode About Last Night, where Biden was shown briefly as Obama's running mate. That deleted scene is the entire on-screen presence of Joe Biden in the show's history. This is one of the most striking facts in the entire run of the show. South Park had made fun of every other president in office during its run. Clinton by name with cartoon body, Bush by name with cartoon body, Obama by name with cartoon body, Trump by name and through Mr. Garrison in countless episodes. Biden got nothing. He was simply not there. People had theories about why. Some critics on the right claimed that the show had been bought off by liberals. Some pointed out that one of Parker and Stone's longtime lawyers had also represented Hunter Biden, the president's son, and they suggested some kind of connection. Most of these theories did not hold up. The simpler answer is that South Park, as a comedy machine, did not know what to do with Biden. The show had spent its entire run building tools to mock loud, scandalous, attention-hungry public figures. Biden was none of those things. He was an old man who gave careful speeches, who avoided controversy when he could, and who mostly stayed out of the daily noise of the news cycle. He spoke slowly, he sometimes stumbled over his words. The show could have made fun of his age, the way some other comedy outlets did. They chose not to. The show could have made fun of his policies, the way they had with Bush. They chose not to. The show simply walked past him. Some of the streaming specials during the Biden years touched on real-world topics, but not on Biden himself. The first post-COVID special, which aired on November 25th, 2021, was a story set in the future, where the boys are now adults dealing with the long-term consequences of the pandemic. It does not mention Biden. The second post-COVID special, aired December 16th, 2021, continues the same story. It does not mention Biden either. A pair of streaming specials in 2022 dealt with streaming services, the metaverse, and Man Bear Pig. They did not mention Biden. The 2023 special, called Joining the Panderverse, dealt with artificial intelligence and Disney corporate decisions. It did not mention Biden. Through every special, through season 25 and season 26, Joe Biden was a man the show seemed to forget existed. The 2024 election came and went without a South Park election episode. The show had aired election episodes for every cycle since 2000. They had skipped 2020 because of the pandemic. They skipped 2024 too. Donald Trump won that election and was sworn back in for a second term on January 20th, 2025. South Park had no immediate response. Season 27 was supposed to begin in July of 2025, but it was delayed. The country waited. Then, on July 23rd, 2025, the show came back. The first episode of season 27 was called Sermon on the Mount. It aired on Comedy Central at 10 p.m. Eastern. The episode aired less than 24 hours after Parker and Stone had signed a brand new deal with Paramount, the parent company of Comedy Central. The deal was worth $1.5 billion over 5 years. It included 50 new episodes of South Park. It also gave Paramount Plus the streaming rights to every previous season of the show. The show's makers had just become extraordinarily wealthy. The episode they aired the next day was the most aggressive piece of political comedy they had made in 20 years. Sermon on the Mount opens with Cartman finding out that NPR, his favorite radio station, has been canceled by President Trump. The episode treats the cancellation as something Cartman cannot survive. Cartman has built his identity around being against woke culture. With NPR gone, with woke supposedly dead, Cartman has nothing to be angry at anymore. He decides to kill himself and Butters by carbon monoxide poisoning, sitting in a parked car in the Stotch family garage with the engine running. The plan does not work because the Stotches now have an electric car. The cartoon is making a joke about how the right-wing American identity, built around resentment and grievance, falls apart the moment the things being resented start to disappear. Meanwhile, at South Park Elementary, PC Principal has changed his name. He is now Power Christian Principal. Jesus Christ! The actual cartoon Jesus that has appeared on the show since 1997 has been brought into the school as part of a new push to add Christianity to American education. Stan refuses to accept Jesus at his lunch table. PC principal threatens to expel him. The town starts to organize a protest against the religious takeover of their school. They head to Washington to confront the president. And here is where the show does something nobody expected. Donald Trump appears on screen for the first time as a real cartoon character on South Park in over 20 years. The character is voiced by Matt Stone. He is animated in a very specific way. His face is a real photograph of Donald Trump, cut out of a picture, attached to a crudely animated cartoon body. The mouth on the photograph flaps open and closed when he speaks. The body underneath is made of simple rectangles. The whole character looks like he was put together with scissors and tape. Anyone who has watched the show for a long time recognizes this design instantly. This is the exact same animation style the show had used for Saddam Hussein, the former dictator of Iraq since 1998. Saddam on South Park was always a real photograph cut out and attached to a wobbly cartoon body. The voice that Matt Stone uses for Trump in this new episode is the same high, whiny voice he had used for Saddam for decades. The catchphrase Saddam used where he would tell people to relax comes back. Trump uses it. The melody of Saddam's famous song from the South Park movie, the song called I Can Change, plays in the background when Trump appears. The musical reference is unmistakable to longtime fans. Trump in this new version is also revealed to be in a sexual relationship with Satan. This is the same plot the show had used for Saddam in the 1999 movie. Satan in the new episode even makes the comparison out loud. He tells Trump that he reminds him of someone he used to date. The audience is meant to know exactly who he means. The show is making the loudest possible argument about a sitting American president that it has ever made. The president of the United States, in the show's own visual language, is Saddam Hussein. He is the dictator. He is the threat. He is the man the show had spent a decade calling the worst character in its universe. The animation grammar that the show invented for one of the most hated figures of the late 20th century is the same grammar it now uses for the current president. The episode keeps escalating. Trump threatens to sue the citizens of South Park for $5 billion. Jesus, embarrassed, tells the townspeople in private that he has only come to their school because Paramount, the parent company of Comedy Central, settled a lawsuit with Trump. He warns them that if they keep complaining, they will be canceled, the way The Real Late Show with Stephen Colbert had been canceled by CBS, which is also owned by Paramount. The cartoon is openly admitting that the company that owns the show has been making deals with the man the show is making fun of. The show is putting its own corporate situation on screen in front of millions of people and using it as the punchline of the episode. The show goes further. The town settles the lawsuit by agreeing to produce pro-Trump messaging. The episode ends with one of those messages. A long video plays of Donald Trump wandering through a desert, taking off his clothes, lying down on the sand. The video uses real-looking artificial intelligence to make the actor playing Trump look exactly like the real Donald Trump. At the very end of the video, a small puppet of male anatomy emerges from the body, with eyes glued onto it, and announces that he approves this message. Parker said in interviews afterward that Paramount had wanted that body part blurred out. The show refused. They added eyes to it instead, to argue that it was now a character with its own personality, and characters do not need to be blurred. The argument over those eyes lasted 4 days inside the company. The episode ended its first 3 days with 5.9 million viewers across cable and streaming. That was the largest premiere South Park had ever had in 26 years. The White House issued an official statement attacking the show. The press secretary called the show fourth rate. The Department of Homeland Security, 2 weeks later, posted a screenshot from the second episode of season 27 on social media to recruit new agents. The South Park social media account responded by asking, "So, are we relevant now?" Season 27 ended up being only 5 episodes long. The show could not finish a 6th episode in time. Parker and Stone admitted this publicly. They said in a post that they had simply not gotten the work done. The episodes that did air went after Trump's second term in detail. Got a Nut, the second episode, dealt with immigration enforcement and made the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, into a horror movie monster who shoots dogs on sight. Sick of Fancy, the third episode, mocked the parade of corporate executives lining up to give Trump expensive gifts. Walk is Dead, the 4th episode, made a recurring joke that the president was openly having sex with the literal devil. Conflict of Interest, the 5th episode, looked at the militarized Washington of the second term, with tanks in the streets and federal agents arresting immigrants in heaven. The whole season was the show coming back to life. The political voice that had quieted during the Obama years, that had stumbled through the first Trump term as Mr. Garrison, that had vanished entirely during the Biden years, came roaring back with more energy than than it had ever had. The show was no longer hiding behind a stand-in character. The show was using the actual face of the actual president. The show was no longer pretending to be balanced. The show had picked a target. Looking back across the entire run, from August of 1997 to today, a clear pattern shows up. South Park needs an enemy in office to be South Park. With Clinton, the enemy was easy. The personal scandals wrote the jokes. With Bush, the enemy was bigger. The wars and the panics gave the show its first real political voice. With Obama, there was no enemy. The show wandered. It found other things to focus on. With the first Trump term, the enemy was supposed to be Garrison, and that did not quite work. The show kept stumbling. With Biden, the show simply walked away. There was no joke to make. The man did not give them anything. With the second Trump term, the show came back the way it had always wanted to come back. Loud, clear, direct, with the most powerful animation choice in the show's history, turning the President of the United States into Saddam Hussein right in front of the audience. That is the real story of South Park and the presidents. The show is not Republican. The show is not Democrat. The show is not a balanced political program. The show is something stranger than that. It is a comedy machine that needs a certain kind of fuel. The fuel is loud, scandalous, attention-hungry behavior at the top of American power. When that fuel is around, the show burns hot. When that fuel is not around, the show goes cold. The men who provided the most fuel, Bush in his middle years and Trump in his second term, got the most attention. The men who provided the least, Obama and Biden, got the least. The pattern has held for almost 30 years. The show has been honest about it, in its own strange way, the entire time. Sermon on the Mount, in the end, is the show admitting all of this out loud. The deal with Paramount sits inside the episode. The lawsuit sits inside the episode. The decision to use the face of the actual president sits inside the episode. The comparison to Saddam Hussein sits inside the episode. Every layer of how the show actually works in 2025 is right there on the screen. The show is no longer hiding. It is showing the audience the engine. It is letting the audience see the deal it has made. Always make sure you are on the side of the people with the most power, Mr. Garrison had said in 2021. 5 years later, the show found out what it was willing to do with the power it had earned. It used it to put the President of the United States in bed with the devil and animate him with the face of a dead dictator. That is the story of South Park versus every president, from a small mountain town in Colorado in August of 1997 to a billion-dollar streaming deal in July of 2025. 6 men in office, 28 seasons, hundreds of episodes, one cartoon. The country changed. The show changed with it. The presidents kept coming. South Park kept watching. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.